You know, virtual reality, I was struck that it seems like this lumbering, scary monster from the movies, right? We don't really know what it means, what it is, and we figure that when it does show up, it's going to have some big effect that's probably negative to us, and we're always told that it's just around the corner. This is a 1987 Scientific American told us that virtual reality is going to transform the face of computing over the next 10 years, and you know, I would note that the glove on the cover we haven't even made yet. Although I'm here to tell you that the glove and a bunch of other things that are really fascinating are coming together right now. They're coming together in the next year or so. And I want to try to tell you then what VR means and give some insight into what it might mean for you. So, you know, this $2 billion acquisition by Facebook of Oculus has everybody using the expression virtual reality, but what does virtual reality mean? I've thought a lot about this. Usually definitions you read say simulated world or computer simulation or display, goggles, gloves, whatever. But these are technical definitions. I don't think they speak to the real question of what is VR and why does it matter to us? What does that mean? So I'll give you my definition. I think that VR, and it's very important and different in this sense, is just something that happens in a way that's consistent with what you've had happen before. It's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Everything we learn about the brain recently, which is a fascinating subject in its own right, tells us that we're predictors. All that we really do in thinking is predict what's going to happen in the next few seconds and then see whether that matches our expectations. And computers don't, for the most part. But what would happen if we were able to use our computers to create environments for us that did match our expectations and in which we could just kind of move forward fluidly and quickly in doing a lot of things? Now, here's a great example. Here's a great example of where this sort of isn't working, what I said. I mean, how many people here now, at least weekly, use video conferencing in one way or another, right? Like 90, right? Keep your hands up, again. I mean, keep your hands up if you enjoy it. Like if you actually like doing it, right? A lot less. Why is that? Well, when we talk face-to-face with somebody, the expectation we have is that they look in our eyes. And when we start speaking, they start nodding. This is a rich subject. It's been studied for a long time. We expect them to nod like that, and we expect them to do it right when we start talking and stop when we stop and blink when we stop talking. Video conferencing, for example, doesn't do either one of those things. But one question I'd ask you is if, by using virtual worlds and by using some of this new technology that's coming out, what if the experience of video conferencing as you know it today had the same utility to you, but was simply incredibly delightful and fun? And so now, if I'm lucky, hang on, I'm going to try and show you something. So there's me, blinking, smiling. Can you tell if I'm like giving you a fake smile or a real one? I'm being tracked by a 3D camera that's sitting here, so it can watch every move that I'm making. And most recently, we've actually been working to bring our hands into that equation as well. So I can bring my hands up here, and I can actually open and close them. How crazy is that, right? How crazy is that? Now, this is technology beyond the Oculus. This is essentially using additional sensors, like we've been talking about in this show, to capture me as a real person, and then project me into an avatar. How fun would it be if you could do that? And I want to just quickly show you exactly that. If we're lucky here, I've got my friends Ryan and Emily, who are in California.
Hey there. Hey everybody.
Tell everybody hi.
How's it going, New York?
They could probably hear the laughing. Pretty much speaks for itself. So you guys tell us, you know, these are the, you can see when I look at Emily, when I look at Ryan, see that dot over their head? That means my avatar's eyes make contact, right, with Emily, and she looks at me. What's it like to be avatars, you guys? How's it different from, I don't know, polycoms or even being face-to-face?
Well, it was great. We were just actually sitting here having a conversation, just talking about a ton of different stuff, and he's in a totally different room than I am, and it's like he's in the room with me. It's really, really entertaining to watch his facial expressions and know that's exactly what he would be like if he was sitting right next to me.
Yeah, it was really cool. The other thing that I've noticed, and this is going to sound a little crazy, is I think I feel a little more confident as this avatar sometimes because, and you might be able to hear it in my voice right now, I have a cold, but it doesn't really matter what I feel like or what I look like. This avatar always looks fantastic. So I always kind of feel that way when I'm driving.
That's great.
Yeah.
You can tell as I move my head, they move around a little bit, and that's because, you know, I can turn and I can hear them from one side or the other if I'm wearing headphones. It's a pretty amazing experience. Thank you for the kiss, Emily. All right, you guys, thank you very much. That's a quick demo. So I think that's pretty cool. That's where we're going. But, you know, pulling back a little bit, my own personal love of virtual reality, what drove my passion for it wasn't so much face-to-face like that. It was actually a different experience that goes back to my childhood, as Peter touched on. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. You know, I was a scientific kid, and I wanted to go into space, and I wanted to find planets that had other people on them. But as I got older, and his dream stayed with me, but I started learning physics and electronics and all that stuff, and I started realizing that, you know, the physics of spaceflight is really tough. The universe is big, and it's going to take us a long time to go out and explore these places, and, you know, I wasn't so sure it was going to be me that was going to, you know, be out there finding anything interesting. But at about the same time, I'll turn that off. At about the same time, I had also discovered a kind of computer programming. I was also a computer programmer called cellular automata. And automata are these examples. It's hard to explain here, but it's an idea in computer programming where you take very simple rules and you apply them to little things, like little blocks or cells or voxels, as we call them today, little atoms, digital atoms. And what we find is that if you just simulate a ton of these things, and by a ton I mean a real ton, like billions and trillions like we're hearing about here today, they start exhibiting these amazing properties. So for example, they can do complicated things when they're in large groups, like send messages to each other. This is a thing called the game of life, which many people in here probably know. It's a very, very simple rule. But at scale, you see things happening, like machines that can reproduce themselves and message each other. Incredible stuff. So I was very struck by how complicated things could emerge from very simple rules inside the computer. And when you look at the real world, you actually see this same thing happening. This is what happens to birds when you put 10,000 of them together in a flock rather than just 100. It turns out that the rules birds use to fly, which are very simple, like automata, don't change, but as soon as you get thousands of them together, you start getting these unbelievable patterns. And as I thought about that, and as I did programming, and this is one of mine, I became convinced that if we could somehow connect enough computers together and run these very simple simulations, we might be able to create virtual worlds so complicated that they would begin to create the kind of beauty and wonder that we see in the real world. And I started thinking about how maybe sort of the outer space that we so crave, the thing that makes it so dreamlike to us, might, at least to some extent, be supplanted or replaced in our endeavors by the inner space inside machines that we can create ourselves through virtual reality. And that was really the dream that led me to do all the work of my life. Not this face-to-face, but this idea of the virtual world itself. And that's what led me to create Second Life. And then ultimately, now that Second Life's been successful, to start all over again with my new company, High Fidelity, which is what you just saw, to keep going bigger and more fantastic. So why aren't we there right now? You know, like why isn't virtual reality something that a billion people are using? Second Life has 40,000 servers. It has this huge economy. It's the size of Los Angeles. But it's not yet everybody in it. This Gartner graph sums it up. This is hilarious, right? Gartner graph says that this is, you guys know this is the hype cycle, right? And virtual worlds, so Gartner says, has finally made itself over to the bottom of the trough there and is ready to begin its climb into utility and relevance for everybody on Earth. So let's look at why virtual worlds haven't made it, even though guys like me have been pounding on that for years and years. But let me tell you what's really going to happen. Going back to that definition of virtual reality, this is my co-founder, Ryan. Look at his hands up there. He's building something in Second Life. He's moving that block around, he's scaling it, he's working with it. He has to use both his hands together. It's like playing a piano. To learn how to do what he's doing is almost impossible. Nobody in this room, I bet, or very few people have used 3D modeling programs. It's a really, really hard problem, much harder than Photoshop. It's not that being in 3D isn't rewarding, it's incredibly rewarding, it's that it's super hard. But that's about to change. There is a perfect storm, you know, gadgets like these, of new interface technologies, and they're a side effect of this amazing competitive progress in mobile computing. So they include 3D cameras like the one that's right here on my laptop that I was using, devices like these, position detecting hand controllers so we don't have to use the mouse. The hand controllers I was using here will probably be wireless. Well, they'll certainly be wireless, but my own prediction is they'll probably be sewn into your clothes within the next 2 years. And when you walk up to a computer, it'll be able to see your whole body the way I was moving mine. The ability to track the head and hands means that that hard work that Ryan was doing of using the mouse and the keyboard won't be there anymore. It'll be simple. And so one of the first things everybody in this room should be thinking about is that means that if we can do 3D in a way that's that simple, just using our hands or something other than the mouse, that means we are going to start prototyping and building just about everything we build in the virtual space before we build it in the real world. That's a significant disruption. There's a second revolution that's coming, though, which is fascinating, and it's about latency. Now, latency is the time that it takes from when I move or talk to when you hear it. What you just saw with Ryan and Emily has really low latency. If you were to throw a kid up in the air and catch him over the internet, you wouldn't just need good interfaces, you'd need low latency because you'd miss him if the latency was off. So looking back to what I said about video conferencing, there's this big, less obvious reason that things don't feel good, which is this time delay. It turns out that it turns out that the magic number for latency is this number of about 100 milliseconds, about 1/10 of a second. That's actually what you saw in that demo, about 80 to 90 milliseconds. Actually, probably about 110 because we're here in New York and they're in California. This graph up here is a study made on voice over IP that demonstrated that people are very happy with phone calls when the latency is below about 150 milliseconds. And by the way, the phone carriers, not us good internet people, but the phone carriers haven't taken our advice on this. Your cell phones today are between about 300 and 500 milliseconds delayed, way over on the right of that, which is why we don't use them anymore. Using a cell phone to talk to somebody, you all know we're trying to avoid it, is brutal compared to using even Skype, and our shot with high fidelity is to make it much better. And there's another amazing thing that's happened over about the last, just in the last few years, really. It turns out that if you do the software right, if you have fast computers and a fast network, you can now basically reach just about anywhere on the Earth at a delay less than about 100 milliseconds. Now, what I always like to say as a physics guy is, it's really lucky that we live on such a small planet, because it turns out that halfway around our planet at the speed of light in an optical fiber is about 90 milliseconds. So what's happening is the whole of us as human beings are going to be connected by less than 100 milliseconds if we do things right, if we write the software right, and we build all the pieces that we need, which is what I'm working on. But I'll tell you that the technology, the interfaces, and the hardware is all there. So what are the implications for companies? What does this mean? Well, as I touched on before, to start, just imagine if the rather painful, unpleasant experience, but utilitarian experience of video conferencing became something that was genuinely fun and immersive. And even if that's true, even if what I showed you was true for initially just a partial set of use cases, you're not always going to be an avatar. You're going to do it to do a design session or a brainstorming meeting. You're going to try something new with it. If that is true, the impact on your companies will be profound, because rather than avoiding these telemeetings or using them strictly for utility, they'll become something people will seek out. And that means that you're going to get these new forms of meetings, things like brainstorming or design sessions, big group town hall meetings, which we did a lot at Second Life. Very, very powerful things. Persistent spaces where people can just walk up to each other and talk. And because we'll enjoy spending time there, remote employees in your companies are going to establish new kinds of trust and rapport, meaning that they can negotiate deals with each other or do things with each other that you can't do today at a distance. Another fact about virtual worlds is where you actually meet. Of course, as you can imagine, in a virtual world, you can have your meeting in just about anywhere, in any kind of amazing space you can think up. Now, that means a lot because, as it turns out, our minds, and we all know this, the reason we have off-site meetings is because we're stimulated by novelty. We actually remember things better, and we interact better when we're in a novel environment. That's why we pay people to go to New York to have a company boondoggle and have an experience together, is because we actually remember and enjoy and work better together when we're in there. But in virtual reality, we can do that all the time. We can easily do that. Every meeting we have can be in a novel place. I can remember meetings I've had in Second Life with reporters, for example, flawlessly. I can still remember today what they were talking about because we were on like a beach in Fiji. If you pull the camera back even farther, think about cities. Imagine if virtual spaces become these productive, enjoyable, useful workspaces, you have to start thinking about the future of the city itself, which is fascinating. Cities have had these different functions over time. You know, they were trading posts, industrial production, but most recently, they are meeting places. And what happens if virtual reality starts to supplant, replace, allow us to meet inside it? What will happen to places like New York? I love New York. I love coming here, but I bet you that the nature, and I also think it's going to stay a place that we all want to come forever, but the nature of why we come is going to dramatically change. So where do we go beyond the sort of immediate impact on business? Well, we know Moore's law is driving this whole curve, right, and showing us where things are going. Now, the hand sensors and the facial animation I showed you, that's going to be done in a couple of years, but where do we go beyond that? And where we go beyond that is that Moore's law is going to continue to drive the quality and the detail of the virtual worlds we're in. One of the things we know is that the difference between a CG movie there on the left and real-time video there on the right, that's actually a real-time video game, is about 10 years. That's about the distance between those two clips. That was a feature film 10 years ago, and that's a video game today. What does that mean? That means that the virtual worlds of 10 years from now, basically, are going to look like Pandora from the movie Avatar. Now, I ask you, are we going to be fighting over the price of virtual real estate in a place like Pandora? We are. I mean, these are going to become spectacular spaces. Are we going to want a vacation there? We are. Things like this are going to be very significant changes. And then finally, to really future you out, if you go way out into the future, there's this sort of law of physics that governs how fast computers can probably go ever as they become faster and faster. But 30 or 40 years from now, it actually turns out you can take a single MacBook Pro, a single chunk of aluminum of a couple of kilograms, and say, well, how much virtual world can it simulate? Well, it turns out that that little block of aluminum in 30 or 40 years, and that's probably as fast, so far as we know, as we'll ever go, is going to be fast enough to simulate every atom in the body of every person now on the surface of Earth, along with a good, few hundred meters of the ground itself around them. 1 trillion times a second, every atom 1 trillion times a second. And I'm here to tell you, as even a dumb physics guy, that that's enough to simulate the world as we know it and everything in it. So one laptop 30 years from now could literally simulate a virtual world which effectively could contain all of us, all of our memories, all of our experiences. And thank you very much. I will leave you with that.